my kids felt betrayed because my husband had acted like this loving, attentive father and husband, and they couldn't believe that this stuff was happening behind their back. So you start to feel not only like, what did I do wrong, but that I am inherently flawed, because how could I have been so stupid? He said that he wasn't happy in our home and that our daughter should think about how he needs to be happy. And wouldn't she want him to be happy doing what he needed to do with his life rather than staying with our family and being miserable? He said that to an 11-year-old girl. Sometimes a court will give orders and a person doesn't comply, and you have to keep going back to make the court enforce their own orders. The burden is on you to make it happen. And so that ends up costing lots of time and energy and money. But that's what legal abuse is called. We were like, we should write a book about this. So we started writing a book. And then we talked to our agent, who said, you don't write a book. The people who are going through this need you. They need a course. They need access to you. And we put the book aside and we decided to start something called our Legal Abuse Support Group. One of the things we teach more than anything with everyone is something called
Lisa, today you're focusing on high conflict divorce coaching, and you're doing a couple of things with that. You facilitate regular group meetings with people that need it. You facilitate training, and you support people that are going through situations where they are dealing with adversary ex-partners, let's say. And you also wrote a book about all of this. But before we go there, Lisa, let's go back to the beginning of your personal story, so where this started. Can you tell me how the legal battle that you fought over multiple years, how that came about?
Yeah, so I was with my ex-husband for 20 years. I never thought that I would ever get divorced. I really believed that he was my best friend, but there were some things that I always felt were kind of hidden, a little strange. And then 2 years before the actual split, I discovered he had basically been living a double life the entire time, and then some, and did some research and planned my exit very carefully. And then it ended up taking a year and $100,000 to go through the divorce. And at the end of that, my lawyer, who I became my best friend that year, because we were, such an intimate relationship because of all of the pleadings and communication, he said, your husband or your ex is not going to follow this agreement. And if you continue to fight in court with me, he's going to financially decimate you. So you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to go on your own. And here's some things you can do to get ready for it. And so after that, he was right. And I started building my paper trail, still in shock that this was happening at all, especially with having 2 kids that he basically walked out on. And then a year and 9 months later, I started 7.5 years in the legal system, representing myself through about 100 court appearances in 2 states, trying to simply get him to comply with the agreement that he made with me. The beginning was really about making sure we both contributed to our children's college education, but as we see all the time with people in my situation, he used the money and the kids to try to continue to punish me, because people like him and around the world don't want a relationship to end. And when it does, they continue to try to destroy the other person.
Okay, that's a good summary. So let's break this down in parts, because I would like to understand what happened and why you felt the situation developing, let's say, and then why also this adversarial relationship came forward. So you mentioned that you were together for almost 20 years, and you thought he was your best friend, and you thought you would never divorce. But at the same time, you're saying you felt a couple of things that were strange, that were off. You sensed it. Did you ever figure out what that was?
Yes. So when we got together, my ex, so I used to be a high school English teacher. My ex was always involved in technology, and he was 7 years older than me. And this was in the days back when AOL had chat rooms and things like that. And he always told me
Hmm.
from the beginning of the relationship that he was so brilliant that most people didn't really understand him. And so he would participate in conversations in these chat rooms with people that were on his level. So I felt like I was kind of cut out of a big chunk of his life, but I just thought, well, he's always been talking to people online. I didn't realize the nature of what he was doing online. And he basically was soliciting all kinds of women throughout our relationship, which he couched in intellectual conversations and bonding with people that had a similar experience to him. So, but in our regular life, he, I think, compartmentalized. So he separated that part of himself, and then he lived the life with me and the kids and seemed to be pretty much a model husband. But there was this level of secrecy that was always there. So that's what I mean when it was like something was always a little bit off. And I didn't understand the term lying by omission until years later, years after we were out. And I heard a woman discussing it on a podcast. And it was basically a type of emotional abuse where somebody withholds information from you. So you cannot make choices about your own life because you don't really know what's going on in your own life. And that described my situation perfectly. My husband did not tell me a lot of what was going on. He'd been having affairs our entire marriage. Had I known about that, I would have ended the relationship. And in his mind, it was okay because if I didn't know about them, then how could I be hurt by them? But to me, that's not fair.
How did you figure this out? What happened?
Well, one day I came downstairs. Actually, my ex-husband didn't like to clean up a lot, but one day he decided to clean out the attic and he started moving things down to his office. And there was like a storage bin and there was a pile of papers on top, and his office was next to my office. And I walked through and I found some pictures of a very young woman. They weren't sexual, but they were seductive. And I just had this feeling inside that something was wrong. When I confronted him about it, he didn't tell the truth for a while. And then he finally admitted that this was someone that he had met online and that he was in love with and that he was considering moving to America. And I was astonished. I think the level of his delusion with believing that this person he had met online was real and loved him back just blew my mind. And at that point, I realized the marriage is over. I just couldn't believe that this was the person I'd been with for all that time. But I still took 2 years from that point to leave because we went through couples counseling 3 times. I was terrified of breaking up the marriage. I was trying to understand where he was coming from. I was trying to forgive him. But he couldn't really be accountable for his behavior. And during those 2 years, I started discovering more and more, and especially with the therapists, more things started coming out. And then I realized through what he said and what I found that this had been going on before our relationship. There were written materials that I discovered where he was soliciting women during our honeymoon, writing copies of personal ads to women. And it was just like, wow, I can't believe my life was a lie on so many levels.
Hmm. I spoke with a relationship therapist a couple of weeks ago, and we actually talked about one of the questions that I asked him is, when do people generally come to you? So when will they figure out that it's time to seek a relationship therapist? And the answer, and this is a short summary of it, but the answer came down to, well, first of all, is in most cases the woman who is proposing going to a marriage counselor. And second of all, when they go, it's usually after like a big event, right? It's not that, the plates haven't been done, 1,000 days in a row, like these small little dragons, right, that pop into relationships. It's usually a catalyst, something big happens. And number one example there is infidelity, that gets discovered. And then that is the catalyst to go to a relationship therapist. And it sounds like that was also what happened with you. Who was the initiator of that relationship therapist? Was it also you? Was it him in this case?
It was him. It was actually someone that he had been seeing for years. well, actually, you know what? I didn't mention something. Right after we got married, I came back from visiting a friend, my old college roommate, and my ex-husband confessed that he had been having an affair, but it was just emotional. It just started. And then I thought, oh my gosh, we just got married. This is crazy. Like we're gonna break up. And he said, no, 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 I'll go to counseling. I'll go to counseling. I think I need help. And I thought, all right, I'll give you a chance. And so he went for a couple of years. So then I thought things were taken care of, and we worked on that. But then all those years later, when it happened again, and me not realizing it had been happening the whole time, his his original therapist said that we should see her. Well, according to him, thinking back, it's like I don't know what the truth was, but according to him, we should see her for 6 months and then decide if we should get a divorce. So he was the one who initiated it. In my head, I was kind of done, but I never wanted to do anything to break up the family. And I was made to feel that if the marriage ended, I would be destroying our children's lives. And so I wanted to do anything I could to keep the family together, even though I felt completely betrayed.
Did the children already know at that point, or
No,
did it come later?
no, no.
Okay,
So they didn't know. I mean, they always know more than you think they do. I don't think they knew the details. They knew something was wrong for a couple of years.
mhm.
I tried to hide it. We would go down in the basement and have these long, long conversations. And looking back, it was like, why did I waste all this time and energy? But I did. And then the day that I finally filed for divorce, and he had moved out already, and he came back because he felt like cooking food for himself. I said, we need to tell the kids that we're getting a divorce, and he didn't want to tell them. And my son was sitting right there on the couch, and I said, look, I don't think it's right for me to tell them without you here. Like, here you are, let's tell them now. And he said, I don't want to. And my son says, well, I want you to tell me, because this was happening right in front of him. And my ex-husband started the conversation by saying, well, I have this girlfriend. And my son, who was 14 at the time, just stopped in there and exploded, and then ran downstairs. His sister, my daughter, was 11, and said, oh my God, oh my God. And it was like everything blew up, because I think my kids felt betrayed because my husband had acted like this loving, attentive father and husband, and they couldn't believe that this stuff was happening behind their back. So it was a memorable, awful night.
Yeah, this is quite terrible on multiple levels. Often when you hear about what the effect of infidelity is on the partner, when they figure it out, when they find out, for as far as I know, it's traumatic. But the reason why it's traumatic is because if you figure out that your partner has been unfaithful and has been cheating on you, basically that means that the story that you live in, the story that you've been telling yourself, the story that is you as a person, right, all of a sudden is not true anymore.
Right.
Because what you thought was true in the past, now all of a sudden it's not true anymore. And that opens up a can of worms, right? Because then you can ask the following question, like, if this is not true, what else is not true? So pretty much the extreme effect that happens then is you start questioning your entire past. You even start questioning yourself. Like, have I done something wrong? Have I missed something, right? Do I have to feel guilty about this? All those sorts of routes get opened up. And that level of chaos that takes over then, right? Because all order is gone. It's pure chaos at that moment. Apparently that's a traumatizing thing. So I would have two questions there. And that is, one, does that also describe your experience? And two, there's another component in the story with you, and that's the children. So what do you think? So you already told that your son exploded, but looking back in hindsight, and maybe even talked with them about it, what went through their mind? What changed for them? It's a very simple question, right? And a very naive question at the same time. But what did it do to them, you think?
Okay, so I'll answer the first part of your question first, because the second part is much longer and bigger. In terms of what it did to me as a person and what it does to people who have been through this, what's called betrayal trauma, is it not only makes you rewrite your whole history, but it makes you lose faith in yourself and your own judgment. So you start to feel not only like, what did I do wrong, but that I am inherently flawed, because how could I have been so stupid to have believed that this person cared for me? How could I have believed this lie that had taken up half my life, that this person actually cared? So that was really traumatizing. But the kids was a bigger issue. Um, I My ex-husband had been physically present for our entire relationship. He was the kind of person who rearranged his work schedule so he could be physically present. He was, looking back, I don't think he was ever emotionally present, but I didn't realize that for the kids. He would go through the motions, but when it came to doing activities and things, he didn't really participate. Like, for example, my son did taekwondo. He ended up getting a black belt in taekwondo. His teacher really wanted the family to get involved. I took taekwondo. My daughter did. My ex refused to do it. He didn't really go to a lot of our son's activities. He was always, quote, working on things, spending a lot of time by himself. I was the one who drove our kids or walked with our kids to school every day. Like, he just wasn't really there. He came along when I planned things, but he didn't initiate things. He did read to our son at night. That was like one thing I remember, but he was always kind of off doing his own things or being in his office by himself. So in my mind, I thought that he was a very present father. But after this happened, immediately after, he also told our daughter, I can't remember if it was the same night. I think it might have been the same night. Maybe it wasn't, but there was like 2 nights. But he said to our daughter that he he needed. I want to make sure I get this right. He said that he wasn't happy in our home, and that our daughter should think about how he needs to be happy. And wouldn't she want him to be happy doing what he needed to do with his life rather than staying with our family and being miserable? He said that to an 11-year-old girl as he was leaving, and she was absolutely devastated. Then he said, I'm going home. He had moved in with his father. He's like, I'm going home now. And he left. That destroyed my daughter at the time. And my son was also really, like I said, devastated. Shortly after he moved out, they tried to contact him. They wrote him emails. They called him, and he ignored them for about a week to 10 days. I was absolutely astonished. It was like he just moved out and cut off all of us. And so I was kind of scrambling to pick up the pieces, trying to get the kids' therapist. It was right before, I think, yeah, it was March. So it was right before Easter vacation. And it was just like an absolute disaster, because I thought, well, I can deal with the breakup for myself. But what am I supposed to tell these kids whose father has basically walked out and said that he needs to be happy? So they really, I think, were so shaken by the experience that they became hardened. We got them therapists. The therapists tried to work with him. He wasn't interested in really participating in therapy. He wanted the kids just to like love him and forgive him and see things from his perspective. There are all kinds of weird texts sent to the kids from him about his love life, and that they should understand, and that they're not going to understand till they're older. And it was just an absolute mess. But the kids did get therapy, and the next 2 years were really rocky. He basically has been out of their lives since then. My son recently reached out to him after 10 years and has very superficial kind of contact. And my daughter just, they do like a little bit of texting, but hasn't seen him since there were a couple of other things that happened over the years, but he basically cut himself out of their lives and is dealing with the fallout.
And it sounds like it's really significant.
It is.
No contact for such a long time with your own children. Hard to imagine, you would say.
It's astonishing to people who don't understand personality disorders, because everyone thinks, well, of course you love your kids. But in my life and in my world of who I work with, things defy logic. Not every parent demonstrates love for their children. Sometimes they do the best they can. And sometimes they just put themselves first. So it's very, very hard for the kids. It's really hard for the parent who is thinking, how do I explain this? And especially for being terrified that their kids' lives are going to be ruined for this bond that's been destroyed. You know, a parent is one of the primal bonds. So often we hear about kids. Well, actually, our current book is about when your ex turns the kids against you, but there's a number of people whose parent just walks out of their lives.
All right. So fast forwarding a little bit. At some point, you and him, you were in relationship therapy for 2 years, you said.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have the feeling that was working out?
No. Oh my gosh. It was awful. And you know what's so interesting is on the first day, as I was getting certified to become a domestic violence advocate, the first day of training, we were told that one of the most dangerous things you can do is go into couples counseling with an abusive person. And I was like, wow, yes. And during that time, looking back, the first couples counselor, because we went through 3, the first one was his therapist. Why was his personal therapist being our couples counselor? She was already his advocate. She also, I think, was very unethical because she saw his sister, my sister, his brother-in-law, like all of these people in our family she had all this intimate knowledge of. She should not have been our couples counselor. She said things to me like I should be grateful that he was cheating with somebody overseas because at least I didn't have to walk out of the house and see them. She told me I should shelve my feelings and that we should focus on why he was so unhappy in the relationship. He lied to the therapist the entire time. She didn't realize that he was a serial cheater. And going to those sessions and being made to feel that the issues were my fault was just devastating. You know, it was almost like compounding the levels of emotional abuse. Here he was blaming me for whatever he was unhappy about. And then he had a therapist saying the same thing. And we've seen that same dynamic with some of our clients where the therapists just make things worse. So you have to be very careful with couples counseling.
Yeah, so the intention is to go to a couples counselor that might help you objectively recover from whatever it is that you're dealing with. But instead you were feeling like, well, first of all, that the narrative was being heavily distorted by him, but at the same time that counselor that you went to went along with that and pretty much, yeah, didn't help you recover, but arguably made it way worse.
She said before we started counseling, she was the one, well, according to my ex-husband, she was the one who insisted that we go for 6 months once a week. It was like, I mean, at the time it was like $200 an hour out of pocket. So it was a big financial commitment too. And she said that in order to do the therapy, my ex-husband had to commit to breaking up this other relationship. He had to make a choice. He was either going to go with the affair partner, go on his way and end the marriage, which was okay. Or if he was going to commit to therapy, he had to promise that he broke up with the relationship or the other relationship or whatever it was and commit to trying to save the marriage. So he swore that he had broken up with the affair partner. He went through all those months of therapy with me. And then we both, the therapist and I, discovered that he had been lying to us both. He had been continuing his online affairs and whatever else he was doing. And so it sabotaged the whole thing. So I think that the therapist felt hoodwinked too. And I felt even more angry because I thought, you just put me through all of this. And the whole time I knew something was wrong. I knew that he wasn't being honest. And the two of you made me feel like somehow this was my fault.
What happened then?
The therapist had some kind of health issue and she stopped. And then my ex insisted that we try again. Every time I said, I'm done, like we need to start divorce proceedings, my ex said, let's try another one. So then we went to another relationship counselor. I'm not going to say here just for the sake of privacy. I'll just say he was diagnosed with certain things that I always suspected. He was suggested to go into very intense therapy that he said that the therapist he wasn't going to do because he believed the therapist would be making $10,000 if he entered this kind of therapy. So a lot of times people don't want to hear, they don't want to take accountability. So instead of believing her diagnoses and getting help, he said she was lying and she just wants to make money off us, and that he couldn't go into this kind of therapy because he would lose his job. So then that was the end of that therapy. So he fired that therapist. Then a little more time passed. He went to another therapist just for himself who supposedly told him that nothing was wrong with him. I started going to a trauma therapist. Then again, it was like the end for me. I said, we're filing for divorce. Nope, let's try another therapist. So that was the last ditch effort that he claimed if the third therapist said what the second therapist said, then he would actually take it seriously. The third therapist immediately said what the second therapist said. Then he said that therapist didn't like him, and that therapist was fired. And I can't even remember like what happened, but at some point I did file for divorce and said enough is enough.
Why do you think he was trying so hard? Because you would, well, one might think that the moment someone gets caught cheating, right, and then after a promise is being made, like, okay, it has been broken off, it's not happening anymore, and we're going to work on this relationship with the relationship therapist. And then it continues. And then you go to two more relationship therapists. That makes one ask the question instantly, why was he bothering? Right? Because it's a huge financial strain. It doesn't lead anywhere. He knows that he's lying about it. What's in it? What's in it for him?
So you're living in the land of logic, which is what most of us live in. But when you're dealing with someone like that, it's different. So
Okay.
Putting aside any kind of mental health diagnoses, someone like him and someone like all of our clients, exes that we work with, it's very different. So most people, when a relationship ends, people are upset. You settle down, you want to each move on with your lives. But someone like that wants the opposite. Something that happened in their childhood makes them fear abandonment more than anything else. And so when a relationship ends, it triggers this childhood feeling of abandonment. And he used to tell me that that was his biggest fear, abandonment. And so even though in my mind, he's the one who caused this to happen, I mean, his behavior, like, what did he
Right.
expect me to do? But the end of a relationship triggered those feelings of abandonment in him, which were so uncomfortable that it also brought up feelings of failure as a husband and as a person. That is too painful for someone like that to deal with. And so it turned into what's called narcissistic rage. And they do something called splitting, where they become the victim and you're the villain. And so everything is about poor me. And then Lisa's the bad person. She's just jealous and bitter and scorned, and she's keeping my kids away from me, and she's wasting money. And if she just kind of let me do what I want, then everything would be okay, because that's what had been happening for 20 years. So it turned into this anger and not complying with anything in our order and denying our kids' college education, making me chase after him for 10 years in the legal system because he wanted to punish me for ending the relationship. People who are like that latch on to certain other types of people to also make them look good. So a lot of successful people, a lot of our clients, we call them sweetie pies, who are like successful and creative and responsible and wonderful human beings, end up with people like that because, like a parasite, they attach themselves to you, and then you bring this beautiful, like, the image to them that they're successful, they're successful husband or wife or parent, and they've got this beautiful home and career. So it's like it looks like he had it all, and now the relationship ending, it's all gone. And so someone like that doesn't want the relationship to end, because then everything is lost.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It makes perfect sense. He was fighting with two demons pretty much, and one of them said, "You have to be a husband because a husband is supposed to take care of the family and is supposed to run a good, successful family and is supposed to show the world that that is indeed the case." But then you have the other side that says, "Hold on a second. There's a whole lot of adventure out there, and there's a whole lot of freedom out there that should be pursued." And between those two visions, there was a a fight happening, and that's what you were dealing with, and that's what your children were dealing with, it sounds like. And it also sounds like, if I summarize it correctly so far from what I'm hearing from your perspective at least, that you what went along with it is the wrong way to phrase it, but you put in genuine hard effort, and not just effort and time, but also a whole lot of finances, and plus on top of that, the capacity for your children to absorb and understand the situation and then live with that during those moments that you had contact with that with those relationship therapists. And it kind of sounds, and I don't think you said this explicitly, but it kind of sounds like you already knew during those, well, for multiple reasons, during those therapy sessions, this is not going to work, right? This is not going to work. But somehow, I think then, and this is projecting, so let me know if this is otherwise. But it sounds like there was like a spark of hope, like maybe if we just find the right person, maybe we can solve this. But after the third one, you were like, no, this is it. Enough has been done.
Yeah, I mean, I was not hopeful from the beginning because I would spend literally hours, sometimes up to 6 hours a day, which now I look back and go, oh my God, I was giving him exactly what he wanted and destroying myself in the process, trying to convince him that that this image he had of all of these people, like especially the latest affair partner, that this wasn't real, that a 22-year-old, if that was even how old she was, doesn't fall in love with a 50-year-old man in America and she's overseas somewhere, and like it's a hallucination. Like this is part of, it's a scam. Like that's what people do is online. I mean, this happens all the time. He could not believe that. It's like he wanted to hold on to this fantasy that he was so attractive and desirable, and that was part of his diagnosis, the need to feel desired and attractive all the time. And so I kept thinking, until he comes out of this delusion and denial, we can't function. And I used to say it to him, I said, I cannot live with this unless you can take accountability, unless you can see what you're doing. But he lacked empathy. And so there was, at one point, one of his therapists said that he was going to have to write me some kind of amends letter, or maybe the therapist said it. I don't remember. Maybe it was the couples counselor, but said that he should write me some amends letter apologizing for what he had done. She kind of skipped ahead. When you think of 12-step programs, the first step is usually like acknowledging that you did something wrong. I think it was the first counselor. She said he should jump to step 8 and apologize. And so he spent like 7 weeks, every weekend, the entire weekend, again, wouldn't participate in helping with the kids or doing anything with the family, working on this letter. And he kept saying, this is going to blow your mind. You're going to have to open it with your trauma therapist. Like you're going to be so affected by what I say. And I remember getting this letter after all this time that he spent on it, and it was just nonsense. It was still like fake. There was no apology. He didn't acknowledge a number of other things that had happened. And I was like, I can't believe that I just keep hoping and waiting for this person to wake up and apologize. He couldn't apologize. He couldn't acknowledge what he had done. And I just had enough.
All right. You filed for divorce. What happened then?
Well, my ex, when he came over that night that I mentioned earlier, he said, what are you talking about? I thought we were doing mediation. And I said, we are doing mediation, but we're not doing more couples counseling. We're done with that. And I said, I spoke to a lawyer and we're going to file papers, and, can you explain it to the kids? And I think he didn't quite believe it. And then like I said, he told our daughter that he was going off to be happy and that everybody should think about his happiness more than anyone else's. And he had a key ring that had a pass on it to go. Have you heard of the YMCA? It's like a community center where people go and do exercise and swimming and classes with families. And anyway, he used to take my son to do like swim classes or something there. And he also had a library card because he used to go to library sometimes. In front of my son, he took off these 2 little tags and threw them on the table and said, well, I guess I'm not going to need these anymore. And he walked out. So again, like cutting off the kids, cutting off everybody when he left. So that's how he reacted. And then he just disappeared for a while. He just, like I said, the kids tried to get in touch with him. I was writing to him going, what are we doing? Like, where are you? We got to figure out what we're going to do with the kids. Like in my head, I thought this is going to be like a regular divorce. I'm finally going to get some time to myself on the weekends. We're going to have like a clear schedule because we never did in the past. And I'm going to get some time to myself and we're going to figure it out. I never expected what happened to happen. And yeah, he just kind of disappeared.
If we take a break just now and consider the effect on the kids, because you bring this forward quite a bit, and I've listened to a couple of your podcasts and a couple of your interviews that you've done. And one of the things that you almost say consistently in every single one of them is generally when you are dealing with a divorce, whether it's in a courthouse or whether it's just within, the four walls of the home, there is not a lot of empathy for the children. You've said it on multiple occasions. And here, I think, is a perfect example of that. What do you think, and it's kind of an obvious question, but do you think that was here also the case? And what would be the ideal situation, given the circumstances in that moment, for the children? What should have been done?
What should have been done is that he should have sat down with me and not talked about his own happiness, and just that, unfortunately, our marriage wasn't working out, but we both loved them very much, and that we were going to figure out a way to get our family through this, that we're still a family, and get through this as easy as possible, and assure them that, yes, they were still going to stay in the same home and have the same community and friends, and that we were going to work it out. And that was it. And then take it from there. But instead, he moved in with his father with zero plan for ever taking them, said, you can have the kids, and just never visited them. So what should have been done is somebody should have been a parent and realized, like, I'm a grown up, I have children. If I'm moving out, I need to find a place where I can have my kids. That's what most people do. Most, like all of the clients that we work for, especially the men, they go through extreme hoops to figure out how they're going to take care of their kids. Their first thought is, I need to find an apartment. I got to make sure I have rooms for my kids, beds for my kids. My ex did none of those things. So what should have been done is like, I'm going to make sure I'm going to help you decorate your room. I mean, when he came back to pick up his stuff, which was also a whole other battle because he didn't want to pick up his stuff, he enlisted my son to help him carry stuff out, which he never should have done. I asked him not to do that. I was away that day. And and then he left family photos behind that were there for him to take with him, and took 2 trays of canned tomato sauce, as if that was more important, and had my son carry the stuff with him. And then after my son helped him carry stuff to his car, my son said, can we do something tonight? And he said, no, I have a date.
You call it living in logical land. And for some reason, it feels like this is the standard, right? In the sense of, sitting down with your children, walking them through it, making sure that everything goes as best as it possibly can, given the circumstances, right? It feels like that is the standard.
It is the standard for both parents to work together, even when they're angry with each other, to put their kids first. That is the standard. My community, my clients that we serve, live in non-logic land. We always say we live in my lawyer says this is the craziest case I've ever had club. We are the 10% of the abnormal, most extreme cases, which the rest of the world cannot believe is real. That it disturbs people to get in conversations about, because they can't believe this could be happening. And it instills fear in them, like, oh my gosh, what if something like this happens to me?
Right.
I can't believe this happens. I don't want to talk about it. I can't believe you, because this cannot be true. It is true. And that's why our clients and our community feel so alone because they're not believed. People cannot believe the things that go on. But domestic violence affects 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men. And the details are different, but I'm explaining just one story, my story, which is extreme, but I've met a lot of people in situations far worse than mine.
Yeah, the reason why I brought it forward as if this was not the standard is because that was actually the feeling that I had. So the feeling that I had was that ideally you would have that situation where you would sit down with your kids and walk them through everything. But for some reason, and I don't have data to back this up, but I always had the idea that generally when people are splitting up and there's children involved, right? There's custody battles. Who gets the child, who doesn't get the child, or you get stories about one of the two parents taking full custody and then using bad documentation in order to prevent the other parent from having custody. I don't know why, but I always had the idea like that was a standard. And if I would have to hang a percentage on it, I would say 20-30%, goes as best as it can. And the other 60-70% would be like a battle in which the children are pretty much, mangled up, let's say. But you're saying that's not the case.
No, there are custody battles. And speaking of custody battles and something with my own kids, my son told me years later he wished that we had a custody battle because he said at least that then my dad would have shown that he cared. He didn't care. He said, take the kids.
Right.
When there's a custody battle, it's horrible for the kids because it's not divorce that destroys kids, it's conflict. So conflict is bad. But there are definitely a number of cases where there are custody battles. But again, most cases, the anger subsides. Things settle down. My cases, the anger never subsides. Years later, it's still like a terrorist that you're dealing with who's trying to punish you and hurt you.
And let's talk about that because you went to a pretty substantial, let's say, legal battle that in the end turned out to be very important also for, I believe, for at least local law, maybe even larger than that.
State law, yeah.
State law, yes. Tell me about that. How did that start?
So we went through, we went through years and years and years of court. So I said the divorce took a year. And then I kind of caught my breath for a few months, a year and a few months, and started building my case to go back to get what's called an educational support order for our kids. My ex, his father was extremely rich. Every week when we used to get together with his father and his family, his father would say, I'm paying for your kids' college education. I have my master's degree. My ex and I both went to college. I used to be a teacher. Like education is one of my huge values. And so his father had paid for his other grandchild's college education. When I was considering, as we were in those last 2 years of trying to figure out what to do with the marriage, my ex said, if you divorce me, I will not contribute to our children's college education. I said, because he knew that's what would hurt me a lot. And I said, how can you say that? Your father has promised, he's got all this money he paid for his other grandchild, and now you're saying not only will he not, but you won't either. And he said, I'm not going to do it. And I said, no, I'm not letting this happen. So that became the sticking point with the agreement, the divorce agreement. He wouldn't put in for college. And my lawyer said, you're going to have to go back and get an educational support order, because in our agreement, it did say that had we stayed together, we each would have contributed to our kids' college education. So when I went back to get you go to court and you have to have the court order what percentage each person pays for a kid's college education. And in America, college is extremely expensive. So, in that process, I ended up talking to an attorney who said, you know what, you've got the college thing, but you also have a fraud case. Your ex was dishonest about a number of financial things. So if you're going back, you might as well go back for some other things, alimony and child support. Those numbers need to be increased. And that was a whole other story. So I went in for 3 things, and then we started the battles, and my ex just refused. We took a year just to get an order for my son's education. At that time, he had already started college, and my ex was supposed to reimburse a certain percentage for his freshman year. he was at a private college and my ex refused to pay his share. So my son actually had to leave college because his father wouldn't do what he was supposed to do. So that was really hard. It ended up being okay. But the court, I remember the judge saying to my ex, "Sir, don't you understand that if you don't contribute to your son's education, if you can't reimburse your ex-wife, your son is going to have to leave college?" And, and I thought, that actually, instead of scaring him, that gave him the tools to realize, how can I hurt her the most? And so he didn't pay for college. And our son did have to leave school. So that was really, really frustrating. And then in the subsequent years, over COVID and everything else, we dealt with, again, the first child getting the reimbursement. And then our second child, he absolutely refused to pay for our daughter's education. So that was a whole other battle. And then increase in child support and alimony for the false numbers that he submitted to court. So all this stuff went on for years and years. And Jeffrey, you had asked about contempt. So my ex was found in contempt 5 times during that process. And I just had the court in America, and actually in all over the world, because our clients are all over the world. Sometimes a court will give orders and a person doesn't comply, and you have to keep going back to make the court enforce their own orders. And I've interviewed many attorneys who say this is one of the difficult things. You would think that a court, when it makes an order, that's the law. It is the law. But then when someone doesn't do it, the burden is on you to make it happen. And so that ends up costing lots of time and energy and money. But that's what legal abuse is called. In terms of my own case, my ex appealed 4 times. He hated all the orders that the judges, because there were multiple judges in our cases, because it went on for years, made against him. Basically, every ruling was against him because he was in the wrong and I was able to prove it. And so he went to the higher court level. And before you go to the appellate court, you had we had a meeting with a retired appellate court judge, because in America, as in most parts of the world, the courts are overburdened with these cases. And so they want to try and get you out of there.
Right. Yeah.
So we met with this retired judge. The judge listened to both of us, told me privately, "You better hire an attorney. This is really serious. This is the appellate court. This is a panel of 3 judges that you're arguing to." But I said, I don't want to spend $15,000 to $20,000 to speak for me for 20 minutes. I have already wasted all this money that I'm paying back forever. I'm going to do it myself. I have support in the background. And then they spoke to my ex and his attorney, because he always had attorneys. And then at the end of the meeting, the judge said to my ex and his attorney, "You are going to lose this case. Lisa has a much stronger case. Don't do it." He did it anyway. We went to the appellate court level. I argued myself, pled my case. His lawyer pled her case and lied when she was pleading her case. And I called her out in the middle of the hearing, and the judges rebuked her. And not only did they lose the appeal, but the case was notable enough to be published in the Connecticut Law Journal. So it became case law for the state, which I always say is like a huge honor for any attorney. And I've been told by every attorney that they've never heard of a pro se or self-represented litigant like me being published. So that's something I'm extremely proud of.
Yeah, and I think you definitely should be, and it's there's so much to delve into. So before we started this conversation, I went through I'm not even sure what you call it, but pretty much the conclusion. So pretty much the summary of the entire thing, and it went on for a long time. So for as far as I can see over here, it started in March 15, 2016. And that's when your marriage was dissolved.
Right. And that's actually started a year before that. 2016 was the divorce date. But remember, there was all that time before. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you said also matches out. So December 21 in 2018, that's when the court ordered him to pay 80% of your college, of the college cost for your son.
Right.
And that was the order that pretty much told him, like, hey, you have to do this. And what you said is, so after that order, he didn't do that. And that's when your son had to leave. That's the timeline, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, and that comes forward a couple of times. So there's re-arguing going on, and I guess that's normal for these kind of cases, right? Because both parties want to I guess I've never been in one, but want to go to the end of the road pretty much to see what they can get out of
Well,
it.
pause for a second. So it's not normal because if somebody is
Okay,
ordered to pay for their kids' college, most people pay for their kids' college. Most people want to
true.
support
Yeah.
their children's college. So even that
Fair.
alone, like trying to appeal when he had loads of money, loads of property, like why would you appeal paying a percentage of your kid's college education of the state fee? It wasn't even like a ton of money. It wasn't for the private school. So yeah, just noting that, like that is not normal.
No, it's a fair point, especially not when it's about your own children. You would say it's very hard it's very hard to judge it from the outside, right? Because I can just hear your story and I can just read what was in that court order. So from that perspective, I'm way further away from whatever you're telling right now. But that said, it does sound like, if the court orders you to help your ex-partner out with the children so they can go to college, then that would be the normal thing to do then. And instead of trying to re-argue, at least on that level,
Right.
right? At least on letting your children go to whatever else you want to do, whatever, right?
Right.
But your kids going to college and then missing out on that because you don't want to pay up when the court ordered you to do that, that raises some eyebrows.
Right. You're punishing your kids. You're taking away your children's chance to have a better life and education.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so the entire thing, 2015, for so far as I can see, until March 23, 2021. And that is when the decision was released. And a couple of things happened then. So he was trying to argue that the court was biased and there was abuse of discretion and those kind of things, which were dismissed. It was not, the court found you don't have any legal basis
Right.
to claim this. So the decision became final. So that's when I see, at least that's when the everything happens. When in this timeline, so when in these 6-7 years, when did you start approaching this pro se? So by yourself?
Oh, I started in 2017.
2017. So there's only one question I can ask right now. So how did you come to the conclusion that was the right idea, that was the right idea forward? Because one might, okay, here's another thing I've heard. Again, no data to back this up, but tell me what you think about this. In every single instance where I hear people trying to represent themselves in whether it's criminal cases or domestic cases or whatever cases, universally, what comes forward is the comment, don't do this. This is a recipe for disaster. So the question there is then, well, first of all, is that true? But second of all, how did you come to the conclusion that this was the right move forward? How did that come about? Because it's an incredibly large choice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what happens for me and to everyone else who goes pro se is you run out of money. 3 out of 4 litigants are pro se because you don't have any money.
Right.
There's some quote about if you're your own liar, you have a fool for a client. But it's not, people don't have an option anymore. A lot of our clients end up going pro se, and a lot of them also do extremely well, but it's learning how to act and to present a case and to be persuasive and to not let the other side get under your skin. It takes a lot of training to do that, but it was the right decision because it was the only decision. I spent $100,000. I'm still paying back those loans. I'm going to be paying them back forever. And I couldn't afford to hire another attorney. And so my lawyer said, you're going to have to go pro se. I will be here if you need me in the background, but he is going to destroy you again. So you have to do it yourself. And so I started, my background was as a high school English teacher. I am a professional writer, so I have a lot of training in communication, and I have skills that I can use. So I use those skills to put together a lot of persuasive arguments, and I messed up along the way, but still did really well because I didn't do everything right. But the right decision was the day of the divorce when my lawyer said, you have to go yourself because he's not going to listen. He was 100% right. I just didn't think it would be that long of a battle that he wouldn't listen.
Kind of, so the image in my mind right now is kind of like David and Goliath.
Yeah.
because in your situation, run out of money, so you are forced to go pro se in order to defend yourself and the children, and you're up against somebody who has more finances and who has parents that are very willing to throw in capital if it's needed. Plus, you are working against a team of lawyers, so it's very much the simple single person, I suppose, against the whole team of lawyers. That's kind of the image that I have in mind right now.
Yeah, I mean, actually, so his father, the one who promised to fund the college education, died during the divorce. The one he moved in with died. And he also inherited about $500,000. So he had endless money to use on this battle. And he did. He hired a number of lawyers. He hired a criminal defense attorney when I moved the case, part of the case, to New York State. He always had people there. It was always some new distraction, and it was like really, really hard. But it worked out for me. It just was a long, hard, terrifying road. And I think I mentioned also the day, even after I won the appeal, he still didn't pay. He still didn't do what he was supposed to do, because we were in court for another couple of years after that. And it was all for enforcement. And I remember having multiple conversations with different judges who kept saying, Ms. Johnson, we're just trying to get you paid. And I said, I had the same conversation 4 years ago with a different judge. So don't tell me you're just going to get me paid. Let's figure out a path to get this paid. And he just kept refusing. But he ended up paying a lot more than the original orders because he got penalized because of the contempt. So that was helpful. But the day that was the final, everything, at least in New York, we still were going in Connecticut, his criminal defense attorney chased me down after I walked out of the courtroom and said, this is for you, and handed me papers that he was filing $1 million lawsuit in defamation against Chris and I, my partner, which increased to $4 million. So it was just this relentless, like, just stop, like, just leave us alone. But it took a few months. We got that dismissed on our own as well. But just on and on and on.
So this is actually something I'm really interested in because, and again, I've never been in a situation like this myself. So I'm approaching this from experience, which is like making contracts and making deals and doing business and those kind of things. But I know that when you're trying to, and actually also when it comes to persuasion in general, I know that if you want to persuade someone of a certain thing, right, you don't just need to have a good story. You don't just need to have the emotional story that brings a tear to the eye. You need to have your facts in order, right? You need to have your information organized. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to be able to go multiple levels deeper. You need to be able to answer the why question, for example, 5 times in a row, right? Just to make sure that whatever that you're saying actually has foundation and actually is true. So what I'm really curious about is, how did you organize this? Because when you walked in and you have some experience that was recycle, that you could recycle for this, but when you started with this, and actually during the entire process, how did you make sure that the information that you brought forward and the case that you were making was not just compelling, but it was also grounded in such a way and organized in such a way that you knew it would make the chance of success as high as possible? How do you approach that on a technical level?
So again, this was a long road, and so I didn't know what I was doing in the beginning. First of all, my dad and uncle are patent attorneys, so they speak legalese. My dad has never litigated. He does not know anything about family law, but I would, as a litigant, a pro se litigant, like, this is my family and my life. So I would get very emotional. So I would write out these speeches of what I wanted to say. And then I'd have my dad look at him and he'd be like, no, take this out. So, but essentially what it boiled down to are really 3 elements. And this is what we teach our clients in terms of making a compelling case: logos, pathos, and ethos. So logos is Latin for logic, and that stands for basically the facts of the case. So that's that's important, what the truth, and getting your documentation in order, and making sure they align with the actual issues of what you're in court for. Because each motion, at least in America, generally, it's a single issue. Sometimes a court will combine different issues, but you need to make sure you understand what you're there for, and all of your facts align with only what relates to that particular issue. So sometimes people say the facts speak for themselves, but they really don't, because that's only 1/3 of a persuasive case. The second is pathos, and that's the emotion with which you present those facts. And so being a New Yorker, even though I live right over the border in Connecticut now, I live near New York City. There's a lot of crazy people standing on soapboxes, like pontificating about whatever. Nobody pays attention. So imagine if they're telling the truth, their presentation makes us not want to listen to them. So the same thing goes for court, where you need to be as likable as possible, because that increases your credibility. So we want our clients to be, number one, as calm as possible, even though saying calm down just triggers them. So we help them be calm by staying focused and organized. And that's what I tried to do myself. That's how I learned, is like focus on the stuff that matters. I would often come in with these speeches and I'd be like, blah, blah, blah. And then the judge would stop me 4 sentences and say, get to the point. So now we teach something called front loading. We say it's like you're paying $8 million for a 30-second Super Bowl commercial. You got to be tight. You got to come in and be like, Your Honor, here's what I'm asking for. Here's what why I'm entitled to it. And then getting into that. So logos and pathos, that's still only 2/3 of the case, persuasion. The last part is something we call ethos. And that's the courtroom decorum or etiquette. It's the atmosphere that it's understanding the system that you're operating within. And so I imagine that even though you're Dutch, you've heard of the movie The Wizard of Oz, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the wizard, I always say it's like a courtroom. The wizard is the judge. It's like a god, and you're Dorothy, and you are begging. You do not come in with guns blazing going, this is how things are, and I deserve it. You have to be extremely deferential and realizing your place within that system and operating properly. So those 3 things all go together in creating a persuasive, compelling case. And in court, at least in family court, which in America is considered adversarial, which means that it's not about the facts all the time. It's about like who's the loudest. It's like a competition. You have to be ready to pivot and to kind of go with the flow. You have to pay a lot of attention to body language. You have to keep your own face under control, which I always have a problem with because I tend to gesture and roll my eyes. If you don't want to do that, that's disrespectful.
That's bad. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So all of those things take a lot of training in order to be effective. Because again, being a pro se, this is your life. The other side is a hired gun. They are going to bully you. They are going to do whatever they can to get you distracted so that you can't think straight. And so it takes a lot of work to be like, I'm ready to go pro se. And we have clients who we've seen for years who they have a lawyer and then they're like, am I ready to go pro se? And sometimes we say, yes, you could totally do it. And other times we're like, we need to work on your presentation.
Are you an analytical person?
I think so.
You sound like it. No, you sound like it. Because whatever you're saying right now, it makes total sense. It makes complete sense. But you need to be able, for as far as I can tell, you need to be able to do a couple of things over there. You need to be analytical. So you need to not just gather information, right? Not just know technically how stuff works. So not just soundboarding with people that can give you knowledge or information or tools that you can use during those moments. That's helpful, but you also need to be able to organize it, right? You need to be able to make sense out of it. You need to be able to understand it properly. You need to analyze it. And then it doesn't stop there. You need to convert it so it becomes a package of information that you can give another person, or in this case, a judge, for them to understand it. So that's an incredibly complex process right over there, right?
And you're flexible. As you're converting, you have to be flexible because what you think is going to work sometimes is different. So,
yes, it really depends on the person that you're dealing with. But at the same time, and I think this is, so that's one skill that you need to have. But at the same time, it sounds like another, I'm not sure if skill is the right word. I think it's more like a personality trait. A personality trait that you have to suppress in this case is that that tendency to be emotional, that tendency to become upset, right? That your heart starts beating very fast and that you can't think clear anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are fighting a battle over here, right? And you can't do that with the fog of war in your mind. So the question there is, and this is just a question aimed at your personality. Do you think you as a person, you are very, very quickly emotional, or are you like the kind of person that is more level-headed in general? Can you take a step back and be more, cold again is not the right word, but is more analytical person that can just look at the situation objectively and see, okay, even though I am part of this situation, even though it's my skin in the game and it's the skin of my children in the game, I can still take a step back and just look at this strategically, right? And tactically, because that requires a significant ability to be able to zoom out and to see the entire picture and to not get caught up in the details of the lies, let's say, that you can almost make the argument that can very easily reel you back into becoming very emotional. And then obviously that becomes an attack vector, because then you can start pointing it out like, hey, look at her. This is that emotional person that can't keep her emotions under control, right? So it almost becomes like a trap. Short question. What is that, you think? Why were you able to approach this in this way?
It was a lot of practice. It was a lot of practice to get to that point. There's a prop that we use with our clients that I use with myself. It's a muzzle. You have to learn to put on your little dog muzzle and pause. You have to learn to pause. It can be really hard to pause, but it can be developed, and I've learned to pause. And so when things would happen, I would try to take a breath and think and just remember, okay, this is a business setting. Again, this was over years and dozens of court appearances that I learned to do that. But one thing that I would remember and that we also share with our clients is, like, you know your case better than anybody else. No lawyer that you hire is going to know those details like you do. So it's a matter of accessing those details. And in order to access those details, you have to be thinking clearly. So you have to try to stay calm as possible. So sometimes, I'd be trying to remember so many things, but I'd have different pieces of paper or little hints for myself, like, don't forget to say this, or don't forget to say this, or I'd start using bullet points so that I wouldn't have to remember the whole thing, but something to just remind myself to stay in the moment. Often, we'll tell our clients, like, bring certain things to court or do certain things, like with temperature, to keep your brain in place, like drink like really cold water, hold ice on your wrists if you're doing a Zoom meeting because you can't bring ice to court. But things to, like, really work with your nervous system. If you can, one of the best pieces of advice I got from a friend who was a court translator years ago, she said, all you need to be is calm. If you can be calm, it's going to happen for you, because then your brain can remember everything else. So if you can stay calm, you're going to do fine. And that's what we tell our clients. We're like, but I don't know, blah, blah. I'm like, you have it. You know all this stuff. Yes, we have to get it organized. But once you're calm, it just starts to flow a lot better. I mean, you think of like athletes, right? It's that same kind of intense concentration.
This is actually quite fun, because this is a really good skill to have. You also mentioned that, well, what you're talking about is the concept of know your audience, right?
Yes.
And you went over it quite quickly, but one of the things that you said is you don't want to make a huge, super large, super emotional argument towards a judge. They will tell you, get to the point.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want
in
30 seconds? That's the know your audience. And it's kind of funny, because at the same time, what you're technically doing is you're putting yourself in their shoes, and you already mentioned this earlier. They have dozens, maybe they have, 50 or 60 of these similar cases per day, right? So the harder that you as either a defendant or the person actively pursuing this make it for them, the more annoying, let's say, you become, right? You want to be this person that just makes it easy for them to understand.
we want our clients to be the proactive problem solver. So in order to
Right.
make it easy for them to not come in and say, here's this problem, solve it, to say, here's this problem, I already have a solution and I have an alternate solution. So we can,
Yeah.
here it is. This is what I'm asking for. Here's why. We could try this or we could try this or whatever you want, Your Honor. But there's times over my own case where I asked the judge for something and I wrote up what I said, if Your Honor, if you can give me something just like this is what I need. And the judge signed it into order twice, which was amazing. But looking back, it was like, well, of course she signed it. I made her job easy for her. I gave her something that was it was well thought out, it was reasonable, and it aligned with the law. So that's why she did it. And it felt really great that she did it. So we always have our clients try to come up with solutions. So they're not just in here like, oh, solve the problem for me. No,
Mhm.
I got it. You can decide if you're going to allow it, obviously, because you're the judge, but here are a couple of ideas. So proactive problem solver.
In this specific setting, we also hear the term legal gaslighting a lot. What is that?
Okay, when you said that, as soon as you said that, I thought about from the very first time I met my ex-husband's like third attorney in Connecticut, and she would always say, Lisa, you don't understand because you're not a lawyer. Now, this is the lawyer that I
Mm.
beat on the appellate court level who was noted for submitting information that had no basis in fact or law. So she would say things, and in my head, I thought, am I wrong? Like, she's a lawyer. So she's telling me how things are, even though I know that's not true. So, for example, my ex being found in contempt, he was supposed to pay a certain amount from like a couple of years ago for something. And she kept saying, no, 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 that's not, he already paid it. And I said, no, no, he didn't. And so I kept thinking, like, did I make a mistake? And that's what gaslighting is. You think you're the one who's off, even though you know what you're being told is wrong. And so we had a moment with one of the judges. This is after the appeal where she kept saying that. And I said to the judge, Your Honor, like, look at this. Like, he's been found in contempt. He hasn't purged himself of the contempt. This is what he has to do. And the judge finally said to this lawyer, are you saying that that he's already followed this court order? He's already paid what he's supposed to? She goes, no, and she said, well, but it's a court order. Like, he has to follow it. And his lawyer was kind of like, really? I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so glad finally a judge was able to ask to stand up to this lawyer. And I was right. Like, I knew he didn't do what he was supposed to do. But legal gaslighting happens all the time when you're pro se because you're not a lawyer and you haven't gone to law school and you don't know all the laws. But that's why it's so important to get your facts checked and to talk to people that can help check those facts and to understand your rights. One of the legal gaslighting things that happens at the very beginning of these cases is when you're dealing with someone who's manipulative is they'll try to convince you that you don't need a lawyer, that you know them so well and just believe them and you're going to work with you and you don't need to see all their financials and you should just believe if you sign here that they're going to cooperate. Like, absolutely not. I mean, in normal land, logical, amicable divorce land, that's wonderful, but not in my cases.
Mhm. I think that's actually a really important thing because you said in the beginning of the conversation that a lot of people actually go pro se because the money runs out, so they are forced into that position. So I think we can turn this into a very practical question, and I'm very curious to hear what you think about this. For anybody listening right now that finds themselves in a situation where they're dealing with an ex-partner or with someone who is trying to deploy legal gaslighting in order to get them under the table, let's say, what can that person do to not only defend themselves, but also to make sure that the integrity and the structure of the conversation stays pure and good? How, that the story that's being told is a productive one.
It's not going to be a productive conversation when you're dealing with someone like that. But to even be aware, maybe the reason we're getting a divorce is because this person is not my ally. And so I
Mhm.
can't believe everything that they're saying. Keep in mind that 1 out of 2 people in abusive relationships, especially emotionally abusive, have no idea that it's abusive because it's become normal. And we made that other person
Right.
our authority. So it's a matter of like trying to separate, like even in my fog right now, I am a separate person. This person may not have my best interests. So I absolutely need to talk to a lawyer. Even if I go pro se, I need to have some kind of neutral person that's not connected to my ex that can tell me what my rights are and what I should expect just to separate from that person. Often we talk to people who are like, my ex says this, but my ex says, but and it's like, but doesn't matter what your ex says or what your husband or wife says. We need to separate you, like pull you out of the cult of one and have you talk to somebody who can give you the facts, and then you can do what you want with them. But I think that's the first step. During an actual divorce process, I
Mhm.
think it is very important to have a lawyer because that's the foundation of your case. You don't know what you're doing. If it's amicable, you don't, that's different. We're not talking about that. But you need to have someone in the background who can advise you. And even pro se, there's things called limited scope attorneys or unbundled attorneys, which means you hire them for parts of the case. And I did use unbundled attorneys for parts of my case as a pro se where I was like, I don't understand this part. Can you help me with this? Even having my dad in the background and asking him to help me was almost like a limited scope attorney because I could handle all the presentation myself. I could put together most of the documentation myself, but having someone who knows more than me check it. That's important. And we have like,
Yeah.
certain resources that we often refer people to where we're like, make sure you get the procedure stuff right. Even courthouses often have what's called pro se help desks or volunteer attorney programs where you can be like, they're not going to take my case, but they could just look at what I'm doing and make sure I'm doing it right. Now, a lot of people are using AI. I would be very careful. Lawyers are saying the same thing, like Chat GPT and AI can help with certain things. You still need professionals, human beings, to make sure you're doing the right thing because
Right,
God
right.
forbid your case gets dismissed because you
Yeah,
didn't do something right.
yeah,
Because no
yeah.
one's going to be accountable. AI is not going to be accountable for you getting your case dismissed.
Often, what you also talk about is laying a paper trail, making sure that you document the things that should be documented so that you have a case and so that you have the information that you need in order to make your argument. Again, practical question. But for anybody listening who is thinking to themselves, okay, I find myself in a similar situation as Elisa right now, and I have to deal with this right now. What should they look out for? What is the information they should collect? Very practically, what kind of information is it? How should they maintain it? Who can they share it with? How does it look? What is a paper trail?
All right, you're asking me huge questions, but I'm going to try to answer like a little more specifically. So, one of the things we teach more than anything with everyone is something called strategic communication, which builds the paper trail and puts together the targeted documentation for their case. Through strategic communication, you're actually it's how you communicate with your ex in writing only, whether it's over a parenting app, email, text, whatever. You are
Mhm.
writing to your ex, but you are always writing for an invisible audience because we know we call it you're under the microscope. Even when you're not under the microscope right now, in the future, someone is going to be looking at your communication with your ex. So the goal is you always want to present, especially if you have children, because those are the cases we deal with a lot, the custody battles. You present as the best co-parent ever, but at the same time, you are documenting that person's patterns of behavior over time. So not just a singular incident and the impact that it has on your children and on your relationship with your children or whatever other elements of the case there are. But those tend to be the ones that are most common for us. So during this communication, and we have a whole system we've come up with called FRAC, F-R-A-C, with how to do it, you are building the information for your case depending on what the factors are, if it's a custody battle or if it's a restraining order or whatever else. But you're also turning hearsay into evidence because if you just come in and say, oh, this happened, like, we don't know if that's true, but when you get it in writing and you give your ex a
Mhm.
chance to respond, it then becomes part of the record. So that's important. It protects you from false claims of parental alienation, which we see all the time in our community where the other person will say, well, you're the one turning the kids against me. rather than taking accountability for their own relationships with the kids. So we'll never let that happen because we'll make sure you're behaving properly in the parenting relationship. But most importantly, it turns the power dynamic around in the relationship, because communicating with exes is very, very triggering for a lot of people, especially our clients who usually have some type of PTSD. And just getting a ding, like a notification that there's a message, will like set them off. They'll start shaking, they can't breathe. They get like really, really frightened because it's like, oh my gosh, what's the next thing they're going to do? Because our clients live with that sense of dread. So strategic communication starts building that paper trail and getting your ex's voice out of your head as much, because you start learning how to corner them in things that you could use for court later on. And this is like a huge, huge issue, like I said, and it depends on what the case is. I mean, if it's a custody issue, a lot of times we'll go through what custody factors are, what alienation factors are, the things that they should end up actually communicating about versus not respond to. But big topic. But strategic communication is the best way to build that paper trail.
Okay, on the communication front, that makes perfect sense. But how do so let's say I'm in a situation right now, right? So I have two children and I want to prove to the court that I'm a good father to my children and that I'm doing my fatherly duties. That is not written communication. So how do you prove that? Because one of the things that might come forward is you can, for example, show, and I think this is also an example that you mentioned, you have this concept called the Disney dad, I believe. So that's the father that takes their children to Disneyland and then shows the tickets and shows like, okay, I am the good father in that case. So you could do that, I suppose, but that's, I don't think, very valuable. How do you prove that you're a good parent?
So Disney dad, we tell our clients never to use that word. And actually, my partner, Chris, interviewed a guy who talked about how to use Disney dad in a great way to show you're a good parent. And he was saying something like, well, I have so little time with my children that of course I want to have fun with them on the weekends. Like I want to make these precious memories. I want to use the time as best I can. And that's a strong argument. It's like, I'm really spending time with the kids. But in terms of proving that you're a good parent, I think it's understanding the best interest factors and making a narrative around how what you're doing is supporting your kid's best interest without ever saying the word best interest. So, for example, one of the most important ones to show that you're a great parent is the factor of consistency, stability, and routine. So, for example, when we were talking about what my ex should have done when we were splitting up, and I was saying making sure the kids understood that they're going to continue their routine. They're still going to go to their same school. They're going to be in their same community. Your lives are being disrupted when there's a separation, your kids' lives more than anything. So for you as a parent to demonstrate how you have done everything you can to maintain your kids' routine is going to show how you're a good parent. Another major best interest factor that we focus on that's very, very hard for our clients is to know that one thing the courts care about, and is just healthy in general, is to show that you support your children's relationship with the other parent and you don't undermine that relationship. So if you can also create a theme of what in your communication, you've encouraged the children to have a positive relationship with the other parent, you've been really flexible with the schedule, even when it's not exactly their parenting time, not where you're being taken advantage of, but let's say their family comes to visit and you're like, oh, it's fine, like we'll figure it out. You've been able to do swaps and things. That shows that you're putting your kids first. So those are just a couple of ideas that you can do to start building up that you are a good parent. And speaking of showing that you're a good parent, one thing you should not do is come in and talk about how awful your ex is. That does not make you look like a better parent. So focus on what you're doing right, not on what your ex is doing wrong. That's another conversation.
Yeah. So it's basically showing that flexibility. It's showing that goodwill. It's showing that good faith. It's showing giving the opportunity to both your children and your ex-partner to do whatever it is that they want to do or need to do, or along those lines. And if you have the crumbs, let's say, of those kind of instances that you can use, whether it's a WhatsApp message back and forth, like, hey, can you change the schedule because of this reason? Or there's a ticket to a zoo or whatever, all those different things together, they build this narrative that you can then tell.
Right.
And because it's a narrative, and whenever the court asks, okay, can you prove that this specific thing happened because that is a substantial thing within this story? Then whenever you have communication or a ticket or something along those lines, you can say like, hey, this thing definitely proved. And then that story becomes foundational, becomes truth. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. And so, like, there's about
Mm-hmm.
10 general custody factors. There's about 6 general alienation factors. So that's 16 altogether. So, from teaching high
Mm-hmm.
school English, we used to teach something called the hamburger essay, where it would be like of the 5-paragraph essay, you'd have a conclusion, an introduction, and 2 or 3 main pieces of the body. So, usually the body of the thesis. So, the same thing when it comes to our clients is we'll go through those factors, and then we'll pick like 2 or 3 where you have
Now
the
or
best
then or
evidence,
throughout?
and we'll start developing a narrative and use storytelling to show how you've been like a really good parent in terms of those particular themes. But again, that comes back to organizing something really well, and presenting it properly.
If you are in a situation and you were that you have the element of children and you are in a situation where you are within the courthouse with your ex-partner, what is the best quote unquote way to let your children know what's going on? How much should they know or shouldn't know?
Yeah, that's a great question. They should know as little as possible. So I was in court all the
Okay.
time, but my kids didn't know, like I didn't tell them that I was going to court. I think the weekends that I would spend away organizing my information, like working with my dad was very good with letting me use his office for copying papers and things like that. So they knew, but keep in mind, like your kids are having a childhood. That's their life. My
Yeah.
life is not their life. So even though it was all consuming to me, it wasn't to them. So I tried to just not really mention anything to them. Only when they needed to give some input, like when my son had to write a statement for college, something, but we never want the kids to be involved with the court. So part of that with not letting them know about it was taking care of myself and making sure that I was as regulated as possible and not showing my stress. I mean, obviously they saw me stressed sometimes. My son was resentful because often on the weekends I couldn't drive him to his debate competitions because I was working, and I would say like, I have to work, like I need to earn money. I mean, it's different right now. And, they knew, but I didn't tell them about all the times that I was in court. And one of the, values of the court is that we want to shield the kids from court information as much as possible. And so if your ex, because often our exes are using the legal system to say, oh, mom's taking me back to court again, or dad's taking me back to court, like that's really unhealthy for kids. So we'll put something in a communication such as, I'm sure we can both agree how important it is to shield the kids from the conflict between us. And then just leave it there. And that also, again, is you're writing to your ex, but you're writing for that invisible audience. And so when the court takes a look at your communication and sees that you're trying to shield those kids from the conflict, you look good, because nobody wants the kids to be in the midst of this. Nobody ever wants kids to be witnesses in a courtroom having to choose one parent over the other.
Tell me what the conclusion was of all of this and how the conclusion became part of the state law in Connecticut.
So, I mean, that like the appeal and winning the appeal, that was in 2021. So that was a few years ago now, but I didn't, I just remember getting a phone call because I was like, what happened with the appeal? Like, I want to find out, did I win? Did I lose? And then a law librarian who was like a law student called me one day and said, I just want to tell you, yeah, you won the appeal, but you're going to be published in Connecticut Law Journal. I was like, okay, that's great. And he's like, no, this is really big deal. Like, this is huge. You're going to be published. And I said, okay, because as a writer, I've been published in other things. So it's like, that's nice, but I don't know what that means. He said, no, like I've never heard of a case where a pro se has been published. Like, you're going to be in this March thing. You got to get a copy of this. Like, you should be really, really proud of yourself. And then it started sinking in and it was like, wow. And so one of the things I always think about is how all the difficulty and trauma and everything I've been through, and like, there's these moments of triumph where it's like, if this didn't happen, I wouldn't have this big notch in my belt. And so that felt like a huge honor. But in terms of like the world knowing about it. I mean, I gave live testimony for something called Jennifer's Law. That was like another big deal. And it made my state the third in America to expand our legal definition of domestic violence to include something called coercive control. So that was something that I saw immediate results from, because this nonprofit in Barbados hired Chris and I to come over there and train attorneys and domestic violence advocates in what coercive control means and how they can do better at their jobs. So that I was like, wow, this is awesome. And then having the authority from the case law always adds to it. But the case law itself didn't feel like there was some huge celebration. It was just like, wow, like just for me, like that feels really, really good.
You look really proud.
Yeah.
Jennifer's Law. I read about that.
Hmm.
That became a law, I believe, a couple of months after your case was finished up, right? And I believe
Yeah.
it resolved around a woman who was fatally shot in a murder suicide situation, right? Can you tell me what Jennifer's Law was and how that ties into your story?
Yeah. So Jennifer's Law was named after two Jennifers. One was Jennifer Magnano. She was fatally shot in front of her children years ago during a custody battle. She had lived in Connecticut. She had a son and two daughters, I believe, or well, she had three kids. One was a boy and then two younger kids. Anyway, she had gone to California because that was the only place where there was a shelter that would accept a teenage boy, because a lot of women's shelters wouldn't allow boys. Anyway, so she had to come back for this custody battle with her ex, and he killed her in front of her children. So that was one of the Jennifers. Then the second Jennifer was Jennifer Doulos, who lived just about 15 minutes away from me. And she was killed by her husband and his girlfriend, but her remains were never found. But it was like everybody knew that it happened. It was in the courts for years. During the court process, her ex-husband actually killed himself. And then his girlfriend has now been, was just convicted and is in jail for being an accomplice. And there's still stuff going on. But anyway, so Jennifer's Law was named after those two Jennifers. And it basically said that in Connecticut, we can't just look at physical abuse, like physical harm or imminent threat of physical harm when we're looking at restraining orders or custody cases. We have to look at all these other kinds of invisible abuse, like legal abuse, financial, verbal, psychological, sexual abuse, revenge porn, stalking, isolation, like all of these other things that also contribute to a situation when we're making these significant determinations. So the UK has coercive control laws, and I think New York just became maybe the eighth or ninth state to pass coercive control laws in America. So that was a big victory, and it was based on the murders of two Jennifers, though, of course, there's many other victims every year in Connecticut and around the world who are killed in domestic violence situations.
Okay, and I want to make sure that I understand this correctly and also appreciate that victory from your case properly, because so let me tie these two together. So, from my understanding, Jennifer's Law expanded the legal definition of domestic violence to include, like you said, coercive control.
Mhm.
And very similar to what you said, the definition of coercive control I got was indeed patterns of acts of assault, threat, humiliation, and intimidation or other abuse that is used to harm, punish, or frighten their victim. So with the case with these two Jennifers, that ended lethally, that ended fatally. What I'm trying to figure out right now is the connection with your case, because so I'm hearing these two cases where it ended fatally, and I'm hearing your case where obviously it didn't happen, but there was a situation of manipulation and gaslighting happening over there, to say the least. So the victory that you are talking about, is that the victory that in both situations there was there was a mental violence aspect that back then wouldn't be taken into consideration of any case, and now is that the victory?
No. Okay. So what I mean so Jennifer's Law, actually, the irony is that the judge that oversaw the Jennifer Doulos case became my
Mm-hmm.
judge after I did the Jennifer's Law testimony. And I was like, oh no, because she's going to hate me because I did this testimony for something, that was essentially people hated this judge because of what happened, because of the decision that she made that possibly contributed to the loss of Jennifer Dulos's life. So, but
Yeah.
anyway, this judge ended up being a fantastic judge for me. But for me, I actually was able to argue Jennifer's law in my own case by arguing legal abuse. So legal abuse, my being forced to return to court dozens of times just to get the relief I was entitled to, was harming me
Ah.
because it was making me
Mhm.
financially as well. I couldn't work. I had to constantly stop what I was doing to put together a court case. I couldn't afford an attorney. So it was creating dependence on my ex by having to still interact with him through the legal system. So that legal abuse is a form of coercive control because I couldn't move on with my life. I still had to deal with him
Mhm.
for years in the legal system. And so I argued that to that judge. And again, this was after the appeal was won. This was after the educational support order. But in terms of asking for orders, I called it orders with teeth, right? I asked her, I said, Your Honor, it's been this many years, this many court appearances in 2 states. I can't just have orders that you say he has to pay and it has to be by this date. I need like deadlines and consequences. I need punishment because this system has basically emboldened this person by not enforcing your own orders. And this judge heard me really strongly. She gave me excellent orders. She gave me orders with teeth beyond what I had asked for. And he finally started changing and doing what he was supposed to do. And that's when
Mm.
peace started. He's still not perfect. I still have to go after my ex, but I haven't been back to court since 2023 or 2024.
Very good. There's one thing about you that I can't really place yet. And I want to ask you about it. I'm very curious about it. Because this entire, let's call it an adventure. Let's call it this entire thing that you have been engaged in for so long. I haven't asked you this point blank, but I can make the assumption that it has been incredibly draining. And you said the time investment that you put in it is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're focusing on helping other people through that and organizing themselves in such a way, let's say, that they can win that legal battle against an adversary ex-partner. But if I just look at you as a person, why did you want to take that step? So two questions. One is because I think the assumption is again that it was very taxing, but after that you pretty much continued with it, but then in service of others, and it's very noble. I love that. It's beautiful, but I'm curious why did you feel that calling to help others with the same challenge?
That's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that in quite the same way. But like I said, I used to be a high school English teacher. I love my
Mhm.
job. I was a workaholic. I loved writing with my students. I loved teaching the art of persuasion. I love creative writing. And I could not go back to teaching because I was in court all the time. I started doing interviews for teaching jobs, and I was still so immersed that I would have to stop what I was doing to go back to court. And so I couldn't teach. And then during COVID, I always felt like I got such an education. I always say my best education was in those trenches of family court that I thought, I wonder if there's something that I could do with this because this experience is so crazy. I didn't even know the term legal abuse until 2021. And then I found the term and I, with my partner, Chris, who's the male half of Been There, Got Out, as well as my life partner for the past 10 plus years, we were like, we should write a book about this. So we started writing a book. And then we talked to our agent who said, you don't write a book. The people who are going through this need you. They need a course. They need access to you. And also, I was never really involved with social media, but from my first book, which was about backpacking through Europe as a rite of passage, nearly 20 years had passed. And I thought, oh, we'll do another book. But then because social media and publishing world change, I was told you have to make yourself an expert in your field. Like travel has nothing to do with divorce. So you have to start building a social media platform. So I started working on Instagram and turning it into like basically taking my classroom from when I taught high school and putting it into a social media thing where I put quotes up or articles that I'd read on the topic or talk a little bit about what I was going through and getting a conversation started. And the social media started growing and growing. And then in 2021, Chris and I decided to niche down and we put the book aside and we decided to start something called our legal abuse support group. And so actually today, Sunday, is the day that we meet. We meet every Sunday from 12 to 1:45 p.m. Eastern time. And we do the very unusual thing of blending our male and female clients together in the domestic violence space because we know that abuse is a human issue, not a gender issue. And we strategize and we deal with the bigger issues of how are my kids going to be okay? And how do I co-parent with someone who often doesn't care about the kids and just wants to punish me? So the first part about me being an educator and not being able to go back to regular teaching, COVID, the book turning into support group, and then Chris getting his high conflict divorce coach certification, we were like, let's just see if we can do something with all this experience so that other people don't have to go through it. And then my master's degree and the teaching background is like, I love teaching and I love helping other people and I'm fascinated by relationships. And I'd gotten all of this wisdom and knowledge and experience from my own situation. And then in 2021, we basically put our little shingle out on Instagram and it has been flooded ever since with people going through the types of situations that I went through and that Chris went through. And so we are very, very niche, but it is so rewarding. Like that teacher in me, that workaholic teacher is like now, instead of being stuck in a high school classroom with kids on their phones, which I don't know if I could deal with, I'm dealing with people, men and women all over the world. And I get to watch them transform from being, we call a puddle, into a ninja, where I meet them. Our clients tend to be like really successful in other areas, like the most wonderful human beings who are terrified, living with a sense of dread, not understanding what's going on, how this happened to them, blaming themselves for it, being terrified for their kids, being where I was all those years ago, and being able to help them calm down and get through it and get themselves back and have a lot of power and do what they need to do to protect themselves and their kids and get out of the system. And so to watch their faces, because we meet everyone virtually on screens, but to see them stop holding their breath and their faces to change and for them to start looking younger and happier and healthier and to move on with their lives, even with this terrorist in the background, is so incredibly rewarding that I feel like I was made for this. Like I never knew that I was. I had the training and education. Then I went through this awful thing for all these years. And so just putting it together seems like the right thing to do. Plus, in the process, I met the love of my life. He became my business partner. So we're modeling healthy relationships. All of our children, my two and his two, have seen us together for these years. And it's just like, wow, I love being on the other side of it and being able to offer comfort and strength to people who are still in the muck.
And it looks like you're doing it with a passion, and that's really fun to see. I checked your podcast out, and there's almost 300 episodes on there. And what I really enjoy seeing in that is that you are very meticulous in the kind of information that you're putting out. So you're focusing different episodes on different subjects, and you're going into detail on what these different things mean and what the implications of them might be for the people that they're dealing with it. So that's really good to see, and I can imagine that is really helpful for many, many people, not just in the States, but it's very practical as well. So it looks like there's a lot of passion in there. It looks like there's a lot of love in there. You're doing it with your book. You're doing it in this conversation. You're doing it with your podcast. You're doing it on social media. And like you said, there are people that are reacting very positively to it. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, have you already had? And this is kind of a cheesy question, right? Like, tell me your success story. It's a very cheesy question.
You haven't asked any cheesy questions yet, so you're allowed to ask one.
Okay, I have a couple in the can then. Okay, I'm gonna ask you a cheesy question. Have you already heard from someone, or maybe multiple people, that have found your content, or that have done those trainings, or that have been part of those groups, or that have listened to a podcast, right? Or read your book, and that reach out to you and say, Lisa, damn, what you have put out there, right? That message that you have given me, and that information that you have provided for me, that has allowed me to win this battle and to create this stable ground and to operate, to live life again, with or without children, if those are an element, but in this case, maybe with children. It has provided relief, a solution. Have you heard those stories?
Constantly. That's why I love what I do. It's so rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this sounds cheesy too, but this is like we're saving people's lives, not to be melodramatic, but it's saving people's lives because they feel like their life is over and it's going to be miserable. And it's teaching them that it's not, and that this is not going to be over fast, but you cannot put your life on hold. So we hear those comments all the time. We have like Chris is redoing the website, and we're trying to narrow down like which testimonials to use from clients and people who don't know us, who are strangers, who are just like, I've just been listening to your podcast. I can't afford anything, but I have learned so much just from listening to your free content. Like that, like what else is life about than feeling like you can help people?
Is there something that we didn't talk about, but that you feel that is very important to talk about or to mention?
Of course, there's loads of things that we could be talking about connected to this issue. But I think that the number one thing that people need to remember is that I imagine if you're going through something like this, you are the kind of person who is highly empathic, sensitive, kind, brilliant, responsible, and you're thinking, how could this have happened to me? Realize that it happens to the best people. And that even though you are probably used to taking on most things by yourself, you are going to need to get help. You're going to need support to get through this. It is not a good idea to do it yourself, even though we know how independent you are and how you've probably been a single parent, even in the marriage. But this is the time to really, really get support. Because if you have children, the best thing you can do for your kids is to make sure that you are as balanced as possible. My son was interviewed on a podcast several years ago. He was over the age of 18, so he was allowed to do this. And somebody asked him, what was the best thing your mother did to get you through all of this? And I didn't know what he was going to say because we didn't talk about this beforehand. And he said, the best thing my mom did was she kept it together. So he did not have to take care of me. His sister did not have to worry about me. They knew whatever I was going through was not their problem. This is so intense that if you don't get help, it's going to become your kid's problem. So my advice is please reach out, whether it's to me or someone else, and also be very careful with who you work with, because you don't want people that are just going to keep you in some kind of trauma loop and about how bad it is. You want to work with people who allow you to express yourself, but then start getting you out of here and moving forward, not keeping you there.
Lisa Johnson, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. Especially as someone, again, who has never dealt with this, at least not from an adult's perspective. It's like a thing that you don't often see. Maybe you hear about it in the distance, right? From like a friend or family member who deals with it, but it's very abstract. It's very non-connected, let's say. But this sounds like something that can definitely come forward when you least expect it, right? When all of a sudden you make this discovery that throws your whole story upside down, and maybe the story of your children upside down. And then I think it is very good to know what the best way to deal with that is. And I think that all the effort and the time that you have put in, all the knowledge that you have gathered and that you are very generously sharing right now, I think that's a wonderful thing. I think that it sounds like, and I'm seeing it also, that it gives people something to hold on to and something that can help them go through that battle that they are facing, or maybe already are in the middle of. And it really sounds like what you're doing helps those people. So thank you for that. And again, thank you for this conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.